2017 has to be one of my favorite years in gaming, with so many titles which came out that year I absolutely love. Nier Automata, Mario Odyssey, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Hollow Knight, Cuphead, Persona 5, Gravity Rush 2. I can go on and on about all these games and many more from that year. But to me, 2017 was also the year of Danganronpa, as not only did V3 release that year, but their previous 3 installments received PS4 ports, which was my chance to play them after years of hearing about this quirky franchise. For that second half of 2017, I was borderline obsessed with this series, as I went through all the games one by one, watched the animes, and just absorbed as much Danganronpa content as I could. I even bought the Danganronpa Zero light novels and these comic compilations, which I can't even read as they're all in Japanese, but I bought them just for the sake of owning them. While my obsessive phase has passed, I've still remained quite a big fan all these years, with the series on a bit of a resurgence again in 2021, with the introduction of the franchise to Switch, many anniversary collabs and promotional material, and of course the new spin-off game Ultimate Summer Camp. Danganronpa has been on my mind more than usual, so I figured this was the perfect time for me to revisit the franchise. Starting with Danganronpa 1 today, I'll be going through the entire franchise over the course of several videos, finishing off with a review on Ultimate Summer Camp. A very late review, as this video will be out not long after its release, but I don't know, maybe by the time I get to it, it'll be a more appropriate season than December to play a summer-themed game. Besides the games, I'll be covering some of the more notable spin-offs in their own video. This franchise is way bigger the more you look into it, so I won't be covering every spin-off title out there, but I will at least cover all the main bases here and give some mention to some other content whenever I can. If you're new to the franchise, do be aware I'll be covering lots of spoilers all throughout these videos, so while I won't be hitting on every story beat across the franchise, things like character deaths and major plot points will be discussed. If you want to play this first game spoiler-free, watch up until this point and come back later. With the long road ahead of me, I won't waste any more time, so let's start with what might be a bit of an unpopular opinion. My favorite entry in the franchise, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. Our story begins with just your average teen, Makoto Nagi, at the gates of the extremely prestigious school of Hope's Peak Academy. A school with such a vast number of resources, you are guaranteed to be set for life upon graduation. Catch is they only accept the most talented of students, referred to as ultimates. These talents can encompass many things, such as programming, swimming, being an idol, or even being a rich asshole. But if you're not one of these talented students, there is another way to get in, which is a raffle Hope's Peak holds once a year for all the normie prospects out there. This raffle winner is referred to as the ultimate lucky student, and is how Makoto gets to begin his new life as a student at Hope's Peak. Please ignore the fact the second game completely retcons this with the introduction of the reserve course, but that topic can wait for next time. Upon walking in, Makoto suddenly finds himself passed out in a lone classroom with no clue as to how he got there. Once he steps outside and locates his other 14 classmates, they're all equally as confused about their situation. After some initial conversation, they are summoned to the gym where they meet series mascot and antagonist Monokuma, who reveals to them they are trapped within Hope's Peak forever, unless one of them kills another student. This is the premise to Danganronpa 1, and really the entire series, as subsequent entries all have some variation to the setup. You're trapped in some location with a cast of quirky characters, and as the people around you die, you're left to figure out why this is happening and how to get out. From the get-go, the biggest hook for me was this mystery looming over you as to why you're trapped to begin with. While each chapter features its own murder case to solve as students get killed one by one, the larger mystery of who is masterminding all this and why is the real draw here. To go alongside this mystery element to the game, Danganronpa 1 especially has this eerie atmosphere to it, which I love, with how creepy Hope's Peak feels to walk around in, with the odd lighting, and how everything is boarded up. If you're familiar with the concept of liminal spaces, Danganronpa 1 is basically one huge example of that. If you've ever walked around your school once most people have left, and it feels slightly unsettling, that's exactly what I'm getting at. Atmosphere goes a long way for me in games, and it plays a big part as to why this is my favorite in the franchise, as subsequent entries don't quite have the same creepiness to them, with 2 being set on a tropical island, and V3 giving you a large open space outside. While Danganronpa, by the very basis of its premise, sounds like a dark series, the absurd element present here, in my opinion, outweighs the grimmer tones the series will hit. The ultimate talents are full-fledged superpowers at points, and the major conflict of hope versus despair can be a bit hard to take seriously. You'll be hearing those words more times across these games than you will the rest of your life. Just know Danganronpa can be very out there at times, which may be a bit off-putting, but it definitely adds a uniqueness to it. If wacky characters and scenarios rolled up with murder mysteries sounds like your thing, I definitely recommend this series, which for the most part gets better with each entry. Returning to Makoto and the rest of her students following Monokuma's announcement, they're now left to figure themselves out as they begin to live their new school life. At least for Makoto, things begin to look up for him pretty fast as he finds himself befriending former schoolmate and now world-famous idol, Saika Maizono. Chapter 1 focuses a lot on his relationship with her, with all the awkward romantic tension you would expect. Danganronpa being the type of game that it is, I was wary of Saika's friendship, and with how perfect the game depicted her. I expected a betrayal later in the story, maybe once trust between the two had been built up even further. My hunch would prove to be partly right, as she ends up as the first victim in our story, following a failed attempt at framing Makoto for murder. The two would end up swapping rooms one night, where Saika would then lure in Leon to try and murder him, leaving his body in Makoto's room, thus pinning the fault on him. Only for Leon to successfully defend himself and end up killing her instead. I really love this first chapter, as for one, it drives home the point of how you can't really trust anyone in this game, as we just saw how even our closest friend was willing to betray you. This seed of doubt is planted within you for the rest of the game, and it comes into play again, especially in chapter 5, when your trust in Kyoko comes into question. This initial setup of having the protagonist be blamed for the crime you know you didn't commit is a great way for Makoto to begin taking charge and wanting to find the truth. Without this motivation, it'd be a bit hard to believe that the optimistic and naive Makoto would be so involved in investigations and be willing to accuse one of his classmates once the crime begins to reveal itself. This first chapter, he didn't want to believe his friend had just tried to betray him, but because of all this, it pushes him that perhaps not everyone will be as friendly with one another as he would like. The final thing I love about this chapter, which some may see as a negative, is how obvious it is with the crime. Saika quite literally spells it out for you. And if that wasn't enough, we see Leon noticeably nervous at certain key moments in the chapter following Saika's death. This may sound like a downside, but to me, chapter 1 is one huge tutorial to get you acclimated to how the rest of this is going to work. While the suspense of figuring out the killer is gone, there's still that curiosity of seeing how it all played out and just what led up to Saika being murdered. It's here we get our first taste of the investigation aspect to Danganronpa. This is important as following Saika's murder, Monokuma further explains it's not just enough to commit murder to get out of the school, you also have to get away with it. This is done through the class trial, where all the remaining students debate over whoever they think the culprit is. If the students get the answer right, you get executed and the school life continues as is. But if they get it wrong, they all get executed and you get to exit the school as promised. Therefore, you can't just sit on your ass and blindly hope to get the culprit right during the trials. While the answer might not reveal itself immediately, clues you find will start to point you in the right direction. There isn't much to the investigations, as a lot of it is just interacting with any oddities you'll find at the scene of the crime. If you happen to miss something at a location, the game won't let you leave until you inspect everything that is relevant. Any other place you have to visit are outright told to you, or can be inferred as there will be places highlighted during that chapter. You tend to have someone else helping you out, most notably that someone being Kyoko, who immediately jumps in the crime scene here to begin sleuthing it out. Following Saika's death, Kyoko becomes your main ally, albeit that friendship takes much longer to develop. Besides her being your new bestie, you realize she has a better understanding of situations than most, as it'll come to be revealed she is the ultimate detective. Her detective skills will almost always yield some valuable clues for your own investigation. These clues are referred to as truth bullets, which is where the trigger Happy Havoc, part of the name of the game, comes from, as you'll be using these bullets in the class trials. Once you've collected everything you need for a case, the class trial portion begins where you can review any clues to give yourself a refresher or even equip skills. Prior to your chapter's investigation taking place, you have something called free time where you can go out and talk to your classmates. This is something I'll touch upon more later, but all you need to know for now is doing so can grant you special skills to use during the trials. Apart from a few OP combinations you can do with them, they aren't that important to go out and get. Think of it as a bonus more so than anything. Class trials are by far the best segments in these games, as it is where all the events of the chapter culminate, and you get to see how every little piece comes together to paint the full picture of what caused each murder. Literally, as the game has you fill out this comic at the end to recap all the events. They're also great in the fact they are all fully voice acted, unlike the rest of the game. Side note, I'm not sure if I'm in the minority here, but I quite enjoyed the English dub and never felt the need to play them in Japanese. I'm quite curious how other fans feel on that. I will say though, one downside is how long these trials can go on for, especially the final trial for each game. Since you're drip-fed clues on the overlying mystery, the Chapter 6 trials are exposition dumps, as everything needs to be wrapped up and solved by then. For this first game, this isn't much of an issue, as the first 5 trials range from about an hour to an hour and a half, but the final trial clocks in at about 2 hours and 15 minutes based on my recording. Especially if you're going to the last trial, be prepared to be at your seat for quite a while. It's here where you get the bulk of your gameplay. As you might have noticed, Danganronpa is more of a visual novel than a proper game experience. You get various minigames in between all the dialogue to string along the trial to keep you active, as otherwise it would all just be a lot of reading. Sadly, for a first entry in the series, the minigames aren't anything to write home about. Future entries add more exciting minigames or improve upon some of the ones featured here, but for now, class trials are at their best in the non-stop debate portions. Here's where everyone is arguing, and you must find a contradiction being said to shoot it down and disprove it with one of the clues you found. For example, if someone says, "Oh, we don't know the murder weapon," but you know it was a knife, in your truth bullets you'll have bloody knife among some other clues as your options. This gets extra complicated when none of your bullets seem to be the right one to use, so you have to pick out one of these highlighted words instead to use as one. These sections are extremely chaotic and get increasingly nerve-wracking when you're losing your health bar as you throw out the incorrect bullet or shoot down the wrong statement. Even on my subsequent playthrough, and with the game guiding you towards the right direction, I still found myself confused a few times as to what I was supposed to be shooting down and with what. The other minigame worth talking about here is the closing statement, which is where the trial is about to be wrapped up and you go back to summarize everything discussed in the form of this comic with empty panels, as I alluded to earlier. You're given a list of panels to input and figure out where they go. Most are easy to place, but some are a bit more complicated to know where they belong, as they can be a bit vague as to what they're supposed to be showing. A lot of the time, I had 1 or 2 panels left over I just couldn't figure it out until some trial and error. There's also a rhythm game here, which is about as basic as it could get. It gets increasingly harder when you have to start refilling your ammo, and when the beat to follow is hidden, but you'll have your own counter for the latter, which made it a non-issue. This is one of those games which we'll see a rework for the next time. This about covers how trials go in Danganronpa 1. I did skip the Hangman's Gambit, but that's self-explanatory. Like, really, don't you explain Hangman? I'm sure we've all played that at some point. Like I said, future entries do a better job at making trials more of a fun, interactive experience, but even here, there's a lot of enjoyment to be had from the non-stop debates alone, and seeing how these characters bounce off each other as they slowly put together the murder with the evidence Makoto presents. With Chapter 1 done, we're down 3 students, as Junko Enoshima also gets killed off this chapter for attacking Monokuma. But hey, I've seen that Junko girl quite a lot before. She seems like a really prominent character. What do you mean she's dead only 1 chapter into the game? Look, I'll get there, alright? Following a trial, Every next chapter unlocks new areas in the school to explore, with a total of 5 floors here. Yes, Hope's Peak is quite the large school. These new areas will in some way become relevant to future cases, and or provide some new clues as to just what all is going on. The library you discover in chapter 2, for example, holds our first clue in this old letter saying how Hope's Peak was to be shut down. There's also a laptop here which upon discovery won't turn on, so the students dismiss it, but on future trips to the library, you'll see the laptop is now gone. That is because before his death, Chihiro would end up fixing it and installing an advanced AI on it, who becomes a major player in aiding the students in future chapters. I would say the most interesting of these clues are the pictures Makoto finds throughout the school. The other students dismiss them as Monokuma firing up the good old Photoshop, but Makoto believes there's more to them than that. The first time I played through the game and seeing these pictures, and knowing how common amnesia is as a trope, I felt very confident that would be the secret to them. Like, these were pictures taken sometime before this whole game started, but you just couldn't remember them happening. And yeah, that was indeed the correct answer. Something you'll likely begin to pick up on, I say definitely after chapter 3, is how when a character gets the spotlight in a chapter, they're going to become relevant to the trial later on. Chapter 1, Saika gets a lot of screen time and she dies. Chapter 2, Toko, Byakuya, and Mondo all get featured and they all play key parts in that trial. Chapter 3, Kiyotaka and Hifumi both start acting weirder than normal and they get killed off. This is a repeating pattern through all the games, which is kind of funny as the game starts to warn you, hey, watch out for this person because they might end up dead soon. Takes away a bit of that surprise of who might end up dead next, but not all of it. Don't worry, these games will always have another curveball to throw at you. Chapter 4 is when things really begin to ramp up, as Makoto comes to find out Sakura has been a spy amongst the group, convinced by Monokuma to commit a murder and keep the game going. No longer wanting to take part in that, she decides it'll be best to come clean and tell her classmates the truth, only for Monokuma to beat her to the punch, creating tension amongst all the students. Byakuya, Toko, and Yasuhiro all become suspicious of Sakura. Asahina, of course, remains loyal to her best friend. Meanwhile, Makoto lands in hot water with Kyoko after he refuses to tell her he knew of this before anyone else. Disappointed in seeing all her friends in conflict with one another, to unite them under one cause and still fulfill her role to call off a student, she would end up poisoning herself. This does end up working, as all of this becomes the final straw as our remaining 6 band together to bring an end to all of this. Outside of everything going on with Sakura, it's here when Chihiro's efforts bear fruit, as his AI in the laptop, named Alter Ego, spills more information of Hope's Peak, such as how they had planned to create a communal life within the school for all the students. So exactly what they're going through now was in fact the idea of the school, minus the whole killing each other part. Not only that, but the reason for this was because of the biggest, most awful, most tragic event in human history. That's a phrase you're going to be hearing a lot in these games, by the way. This event, also known as just the tragedy, is the reason why the school was going to shut down and the motivator for having all the students stay safe inside Hope's Peak. Things are starting to make some sense, but that still doesn't explain the killing game they've been forced to go through and who exactly is the one running this. Mukuro Ikusawa, the 16th student lying hidden somewhere in the school, the one they call the ultimate despair. This is how chapter 5 begins, and boy does the game really make a point to drive that information into you, as that line is repeated more than necessary. But yes, as it turns out, Kyoko would kind of find out a 16th student has been involved in the killing game, opposed to the 15 they were led to believe at the beginning. It seems we found our mastermind, but things only grow more complicated as we have another surviving student on the hot seat. That someone being Kyoko. As Byakuya points out how still no one knows her ultimate talent, something which shouldn't be secret if they're all going to be allies from here on out. Not gonna lie, this moment always bothered me, cause I figured the students by now would have realized that it would make sense for her to be a detective, considering her heavy involvement in investigations and the ease which she comes to conclusions. Especially Byakuya of all people, who's supposed to be smarter than most. If someone could have said, "Oh, I know, I bet you're like a detective or something," Kyoko would consider the possibility and, I don't know, go from there. Just have to suspend your disbelief here, and as far as Danganronpa goes, there will be worse moments where you have to do that. At least for here, you need some type of trigger for how the rest of the chapter is played out, so sure, force in this conflict. How it actually plays out is Kyoko responding she cannot remember her ultimate talent, finding it hard to believe she has amnesia. In an effort to force her hand to speak up, Byakuya demands her to hand over her room key, something he thought would work, only for her to do so without hesitation. This is because she had come into possession of a master key to the school, which includes her own dorm. Following the fourth trial, she sneaks into the headmaster's room, whose lock had been broken by Sakura before her death. In there, she learns about Mukuro, and is also where she finds the key. This sounds like a huge advantage to have, but it proves to be a double-edged sword, as we would see in the upcoming trial. After a conversation with Makoto revealing all this, minus the fact it's a master key, she disappears for the rest of the chapter up until the trial. Things get extra worrisome when a body ends up being discovered in the garden, only for it to then immediately blow up as well. It's here when the game really toys with you, as Kyoko or Mukuro are the only options for whose body it could be, and also the only people who could have committed the murder, as everyone else had alibis. Prior to the body discovery, Makoto also gets an odd encounter / dream of a masked assailant in his room, only for them to disappear and Kyoko to take their place. Did Kyoko get killed by this person and then covered her up with the outfit they were wearing? Or did she kill them with the knife they had in hand? Yeah, this is definitely the game trying to fuck with you. Kyoko has been a second protagonist of sorts with how important she has been so far, so the game now implying her death was a major moment for the story. It was definitely a bit nerve-wracking on my first playthrough, worried she might have met her demise, or at least soon to meet it after the trial. At the very least, the identity of the body begins to be made clear, as it was indeed Mukuro's. The big clue being the tattoo on her hand, proof of a mercenary group she was a part of prior to joining Hope's Peak. So now, it seems it really was Kyoko who might have done the crime. She finally shows up right as the trial's about to begin, and tells Makoto she's been snooping around with that key of hers. Jumping forward quite a bit, now deep into the trial, remember earlier when I said Chapter 5 will have you question your trust in her? To catch you up to speed, the trial ultimately comes down to whether Kyoko killed Mukuro using tied-up titanium arrows as a blunt object. The arrows were found in a locker, which the key to it was found in her room. But wait, how did she get into your room if Byakuya still has her key? She argues there was no way she could be the culprit, as she had no way to get into her room. But wait a second, yes, she could have gone in, as she has that master key. No one but Makoto knows this though, and it's now up to you whether to call out this contradiction. Should you trust Kyoko, despite the fact she's lying and has been a person of interest this whole chapter, or do you confront known facts head on and call her out? This all mirrors the events of Chapter 1, where Makoto's reluctance to facing the truth would have led him to deny the fact Saika most likely tried to frame him. Well, in quite a twist, pursuing the lie is the wrong choice, as it gets Kyoko executed and the mystery behind the school remains unsolved. Our last students end up living the rest of their lives there, which leads to this very cursed scenario. Yes, the game is implying exactly what you're thinking here. I'm not even going to say anything else about it. Luckily, that is all non-canon, and the true ending lies in choosing to stay quiet. If you do choose to pursue the lie and get the bad ending, don't worry, as the game will take you back to this decision. You don't have to play the whole game again to get to this point a second time. Remaining quiet isn't all that great either, as the only other conclusion the students come to is that Makoto must have planted the key in Kyoko's room, trying to shift the blame on her. Before any other arguing can commence, Monokuma cuts the trial short, deems Makoto as guilty, and begins his execution. Right as it seems our hero's about to die, perhaps some of that luck showing itself, alter ego hacks into Monokuma's execution and rescues Makoto from being nothing more than a pancake. Thus, the 5th trial ends with Makoto alive, but now down in the trash heap with no way out until Kyoko throws herself down the trash chute, and the two escape using the master key for the locked door here. Makoto may be saved, but the 5th trial remains unsolved, and was overall incredibly suspicious how it played out. We know Makoto wasn't the culprit, and so does Monokuma, but despite that, he still went ahead with the execution. And we know it couldn't have been Kyoko either, as not only does she tell us when she comes to rescue you, but had she been guilty, everyone else would have been executed, since Makoto being blamed would mean she gets to be let out. The truth is, this trial was all a ruse by Monokuma to frame Kyoko for the murder of Mukuro. The mastermind, worried of Kyoko getting too close to the truth and being too much of a threat, unable to directly interfere themselves and kill her off, instead rigs the trial in hopes of getting rid of her. I guess this is another way Chapter 5 mirrors Chapter 1, in that someone was set up for a crime they didn't commit. And if you're wondering why it seems the mastermind was willing to kill Makoto here, Kyoko blames this on them getting desperate. I point that out as otherwise it seems like an inconsistency. Even still, I don't quite get why the mastermind was going to kill Makoto if they already had plans to frame Kyoko, so I'm a bit lost on that. Maybe I'm not realizing something here, but whatever. Kyoko would end up proposing a do-over for the previous trial, a second and now fair attempt at figuring out who killed Mukuro Ikusaba. This final trial can be boiled down to 3 major revelations, starting with the mastermind themselves. There's a reason why, despite only being in the game for a few hours, there's a good chance you've seen her, even if you don't know much about Danganronpa. Before I got into the series, I had heard about Junko Enoshima, and it seemed like she was quite the prominent character, so I found it very suspicious she died so early on without any fanfare. It was in fact Mukuro dressed up as Junko who died all the way back in Chapter 1, with her body preserved in the Biolab's morgue, only for it to be reused during the events of Chapter 5. She was going to be a spy amongst the group, and had been following a script given to her by Junko right up until her death. In the moment she chose to defy Monokuma, Junko made a change of plans in the moment and instead killed off her sister early. Oh yeah, that's important too. Both Mukuro and Junko were sisters, both being the ultimate despair besides their usual talents of the ultimate soldier and the ultimate fashionista respectively. Except, Junko was a little more into being the ultimate despair, as she killed her sister just to feel despair from it. Am I saying the word despair a lot? Yeah, so does the game at this point, which leads to the fact that Junko is an insane character. I don't even know how to begin describing her, and at least in her appearance in Danganronpa 1, she constantly flip-flops from all these different personalities. She feels less of a character and more of a force of nature in how much she embodies the concept of despair and really Danganronpa as a whole. It's both a dark series with what it puts its characters through, but at the same time it gets so crazy with what it does. Junko, despite just being some high schooler, was the mastermind who set the killing game in motion, but is also such a cartoony character who makes little sense going off any real world logic. Nothing else highlights this more than the fact she would purposely throw clues at the students in aid of them figuring out the mystery here. That possibility she could lose and be found out, that also gives her despair, and so she didn't make her plans foolproof, as either way she gets the despair she wants. Either the students continue to kill each other off and or give up and live out the rest of their days in Hope's Peak, or she gets defeated and is forced to execute herself. No matter the outcome, she wins in some way because of her twisted worldview. The second revelation, and the easiest one to see coming if you aren't already suspicious about Junko, is the amnesia the students are going through. Prior to the events of the game, Junko had removed all memories of their time during Hope's Peak, as that would hide the fact they had actually agreed to live within the school forever. For a reason I'm about to get to, the school felt it was best to keep the students safe inside than have them go out. With those memories gone and the students not knowing what lies outside, that's a perfect motivator for them to want to leave the school and be willing to kill each other. And here's the final piece to this entire puzzle. Danganronpa is believe it or not, a post-apocalyptic game. Not quite Fallout levels of apocalypse, but still, things outside aren't that great. The game even makes a big point to say the air outside is so bad, the reason why they're all able to breathe fine is because of the air filter found inside the school. Now you can see why the students would agree to trap themselves inside the school forever. 1 year before the events of Danganronpa 1, the world fell into pure chaos and social unrest, this being the biggest, most awful, most tragic event in human history. The trigger for this was the tragedy of Hope's Peak, which, do note, is different than the tragedy of what is going on worldwide. Danganronpa 1 goes a bit into this with the bloody room you find in Chapter 5, evidence of other students at Hope's Peak who would end up killing each other. I won't go too much into it, as Danganronpa 0 and the Danganronpa 3 anime cover this, so all you need to know right now is that this first killing of the student body will be the first domino to fall to start everything which has happened up until now. To keep fanning the flames of despair outside, Junko reveals the students' lives here have been broadcast, as the remaining seeds of hope killing each other. Well, that's not exactly going to lighten the mood, is it? And remember, this was all the work of a high school girl who is also super genius and able to manipulate a whole cast of characters to get her master plan to work. This altogether begins to inflict despair on the remaining students, a reality so horrible they begin to question their desire to leave the school. It's only because of Makoto and his unlimited hope that he is able to convince everyone else to not fall victim to Junko's words and continue fighting on for a better future outside the school. I won't lie when I say this part of the game is oddly motivational and brought a tear to my eye with how pumped up it got me. It's a little cheesy, but man, I really do love this final big speech Makoto gives to his friends. It's here when Makoto ascends from being just a normal kid who got lucky into getting admitted to Hope's Peak to instead being the ultimate hope who will begin to bring down the despair Junko had created. This final push is able to restore everyone's hope as they rally together and get Junko to execute herself. Of course, this is still a victory in her book as she gets to meet her demise, but at least our 6 survivors are able to at long last exit the school. Again, this final moment of the game is quite motivational, and for such a crazy ride of a game up until this point, I found it really nice it ends on such an optimistic note. Makoto pushes the button to open the front gate, and the game ends as an immense bright light consumes their students, hiding the world which awaits them. I can't imagine having played this game with no sequels out, as your imagination must have been running wild. I would love to read the fan theories out there of where they thought the series would go from here, considering this ending. And yeah, that's the end to Danganronpa 1. Seeing the game end like this and knowing the rest of the entries which followed it, another reason why I really like this game is how excited it made me to check out the sequels. I just had to know what followed next. Just as the game solved all these mysteries, there were now new questions I had, and I really appreciate this game for getting me so invested in what would follow. Danganronpa isn't for everyone, but if it was able to keep you around for this long, I'm sure you're just as excited to see where the series would go. With the success of this first game, not only did we get those sequels, Danganronpa 1 would end up being repackaged in a handful of other mediums. If for whatever reason you really want to get to that second game, but don't want to play through this 30-hour visual novel first, you are in luck, as 3 years after Danganronpa's 1 release, it would receive an anime adaptation. An extremely condensed anime adaptation, but one nonetheless. I first watched it not too long after finishing the game for the first time, and I was left unimpressed. The anime is just far too short to adapt a game of this length. Everything which would occur in a chapter preceding a trial instead all takes place in one episode. That's roughly 3 to 4 hours worth of content, all condensed into 23 minutes, which leaves little to no room for the viewer to spend any real time with the characters, especially those which die early on. An additional 5 or 6 episodes to let those portions of the game breathe, I think would have gone a long way for the anime to be a more effective story. I don't know who decides how long the anime gets to be, but I suppose they made the best of what they were given. I rewatched some episodes for the sake of this review to see how I would feel about it with a second viewing, and my opinion has stayed the same. For the second time, I did watch some episodes dubbed, which was very off-putting as all the characters by Makoto had different voice actors, at least the remaining characters in the last 2 episodes. If you're someone who's really into Danganronpa and is curious just how this anime adaptation plays out, there is some entertainment value, like in seeing all the little changes made to the story. In the second episode, the gold plated sword in Makoto's room is just there from the beginning, unlike the game where Saika hands it over to him in case he needs it for self-defense. That's one change I saw from the episodes I watched. I'm sure there's a couple more sprinkled throughout. There's also a bit of a cheesiness factor in how the anime implements the game's mechanics, which I found really amusing to see. Besides that, the ending theme isn't too bad at least, and the anime did gift us with this oddly sensual dancing Monokuma, although I would argue it still pales in comparison to the dancing Monokumas from Ultra the Spirit Girls. Overall, it's harmless. If it was able to get some people into the series, that's great, but I still would just recommend playing the game and treating this as a bonus for the more hardcore Danganronpa fans out there. If you're more of a reader than a watcher, but still not enough of a reader to read the visual novel, there's also a manga adaptation of the game. This is some Street Fighter, the movie, the game type of shit, where we have a manga based on an anime based on a game. The first 3 games have manga adaptations, in fact. I can't really say much else as I haven't read them yet. At least as of now, I do own the 3 volumes of the Ultra the Spirit Girls manga, so I will be reading that one at least. Finally, and perhaps most interesting of all, besides the anime and manga, you can experience Danganronpa 1 as a stage play. Now, I was aware of this existing, but I can't say I was particularly curious to check it out until my curiosity got the best of me right as I was finalizing this script. If you thought the anime was rushed, just wait till you see this. Any downtime between major plot events is gutted, and those key moments are reworked to fit the limited time you have doing a play. Chapters 1 and 2 are as faithful to the game as you can get, besides Kiyotaka dying alongside Mondo, but then chapters 3 and 4 are combined to kill off Hifumi, Celeste, and Sakura all in one go. Chapter 5 jumps from the reveal of Mukuro straight into when the 6th trial would take place. As condensed as this is, I can't sit here and say I disliked it. This is a play after all. You can't be up here the whole day reenacting this entire visual novel. The creative liberties they took, for the most part, do a good job of translating the story of the game to theater. The actors all did a great job of bringing the characters to life. I especially loved how Leon, Kiyotaka, Hifumi, and Yasuhiro were portrayed. Even here, we get more dancing Monokumas. I was not prepared to see that. Regardless of whatever form you choose to consume Danganronpa 1 in, only the game will provide you with the option to experience School Mode. After completing the story, you unlock this bonus mode, which is its own minigame with some light dating sim elements. School Mode is based off Danganronpa's 2 Island Mode, and with the release of Danganronpa 1 for the 1-2 Reload collection, this was added in this updated version of the original game. As exclusive as this content may be, to be honest, you're not missing out on anything too special. The premise to School Mode is an alternate reality where Monokuma fails to make copies of himself, meaning the school life can't properly start until he has some. You're now tasked to follow his various instructions for the Monokuma models he wants. This is done by gathering resources all throughout the school and completing the model within whatever time frame Monokuma gives you. You assign each student to a role, either go out and dig up items, clean the school, or rest for the day. Cleaning is important as otherwise if the meter up here goes all the way down, you lose a day to get items as Monokuma will force everyone to clean up. This reminds me on how I believe it's customary in Japan for students to clean their classrooms and such after class. From what I understand, Danganronpa itself is supposed to be a metaphor on Japan's hyper-competitive view on academics, which itself could be its own video topic. You're able to craft consumables to help you in the building process. Some restore energy, refill the cleanliness of the school, and most important of all, some will automatically raise your level at how effective you are at finding items or cleaning. Every student will start out at either level 2 or 3 for their 2 stats, with them otherwise going up the more you have them clean, find items. Very basic stuff, I know. With all of this said, it should be noted that it's impossible to craft everything Monokuma will want you to on your first playthrough. To get everything out of school mode, you must play through it several times. While by your second playthrough you could be finishing every Monokuma build, you still need something else to unlock the true ending. The game makes it seem like crafting is what's important here, but your focus should instead lie in your classmates' report cards. There are 3 main aspects to school mode. The first is all this crafting crap I've been talking about, which for the true ending, only building the final assignment is required. The second element is completely filling out the report cards. Earlier I brought this up, but during free time, besides being able to earn class trial skills, talking to classmates will increase your bond with them, something which your notepad keeps track of. If there are any characters you like, free time is going to learn more about them you otherwise wouldn't get just from playing the story. If you're on the fence with someone, spending some time with them might just make you appreciate them more. Filling out every report card is impossible in one playthrough due to lack of time, which is where school mode comes in. By maxing out your bond with everyone, and by building Warlock Kuma, then finally the true ending will reveal itself. So if all you want to see is a true ending here, on your first playthrough, just focus on crafting those skill level ups and any food to keep your energy up. Forget what Monokuma wants, it will only hinder you if you want to optimize your school mode run. During your free time here, fill out those report cards, ignore the trip ticket option for now. After this first run, you'll start to have a well-oiled machine and shouldn't be having much trouble building whatever is required of you in subsequent playthroughs. This is where the final element of school mode comes in, the dating sim. To be honest, I had to read up on this a couple of times for this review, as while I did 100% school mode 4 years ago, I forgot all the details on how to do so after all these years, and the guides I was reading at first weren't the clearest on what to do. Dating sim element to school mode, i.e. what you do with the trip tickets, is not required to unlock the true ending. It is instead fan service and extra content you otherwise didn't have in the original version of Danganronpa. Successfully building any Monokuma model will grant you a certain amount of trip tickets. These are used to take classmates on dates essentially, where you can raise a different bond level with them. This stat, which goes up to level 10, is tracked by talking to Monokuma, and it's not the same thing as what you have in your notepad, to be perfectly clear. To reach that level 10, you have to say the right thing when prompted, which grants you half a heart or 1 full heart. Giving a wrong answer grants you nothing and wastes you a ticket. To optimize this, I recommend looking up a guide for all the answers. On these dates is where you start to see some faults in this mode, with all the repeating dialogue and the lack of any real long conversation taking place. Perhaps instead of just one conversation topic per trip, you could talk about multiple things to be able to earn multiple hearts to speed up the process. As it is, the dating sim aspect feels very shallow, but then again, it is 14 characters you have to write dialogue for, and this is just some extra mode only a percentage of players will bother checking out. Now, this is something I had completely forgotten about, but if you're close to maxing out a character, there's a chance you unlock a trigger happy heart event, which will replace whatever conversation you might have had at the location. This is a little more exciting than the usual, as it presents it to you in a non-stop debate-like format from the trials, with each combination of options leading to their own unique dialogue. Doing these for a character isn't required to reach level 10 with them, as it is random to encounter it. I had forgotten because when completing Kyoko again, I never got the prompt for it. While this stat is not required for the true ending, The same can't be said for the Embers, as you do need to have unlocked the true ending to be able to see the final conversation with a character you've hit level 10 with. Once you're at the end, anyone you've maxed out will be there where you can talk to them and where they gift you none other than their undergarments. No, I'm not even gonna question that, just take it for what it is. That is what school mode is. You grind out materials, complete your Danganronpa Pokédex to get one admittedly funny cutscene at the end, and some fan service if you've been spending those trip tickets. If you're a completionist like I was when I was trying to get the platinum for a one-tier reload, then this is all extremely tedious to do, especially if you have a lot of characters you do not care for. As a one-time thing, and getting to go out with a character you really like, sure, that's fine. I mean, looking at Kyoko blush here gives me a reason to live another day. Can't hate on that, but anything more and you'll grow bored. I did this 4 years ago already, apologies, but I just could not be bothered to do it again, so some footage here won't be mine. With school mode all about befriending your classmates, and me not getting a chance to talk about all of them when going through the story, why not do something fun and make a tier list out of them? Ooh, who doesn't love a good tier list video? Well, you get one inserted here. I think it would be fun to have this list and keep adding to it as I go through the entire series. Here are the tiers I have, with the very top and bottom being one character exclusive tiers. And yes, the colors for them are indeed a big hint for who will be going there. Love Them is also going to be a bit exclusive for me, as most of my top tier characters are the protagonists. Kind of a big spoiler there, huh? Only rule I have is as I go through the series, I will only take in consideration content I've covered up until that point. That means I'll be ignoring spin-offs and featured games for today. This is most relevant for Toko, as I'll already say I'm going to be placing her among the lower tiers today, but come Ultra Despair Girls, my opinion on her will drastically increase. Oh, and please don't get too mad at me if I rank one of your favorites low, alright? Since this video is already quite long as is, if I don't have to say more than I need to get my feelings across, I'm going to keep it short. With that said, let's start going through it in order they were killed off, finishing with the survivors. First off, we have Sayaka, and she's a bit of a tough one to rank, even after giving this entire list a good amount of thought already. My initial instinct was to put her in dislike, as I find it really scummy she would so quickly betray Makoto's trust and friendship by trying to frame him. On the other hand, it shows a lot of character how she would be so willing to befriend Makoto in the first place considering her status. She very much could have been written as a haughty person, so I like how they went with the opposite route. Of course, since otherwise you couldn't really set up her relationship with Makoto, and by the fact those two would get along so well. I think ultimately she's a victim of circumstance and how far Monokuma will go to mentally torture the students. So I don't want to hate on her too much. Sure, there was some darkness in her to drive her to what she did, so she ain't perfect, but after giving it some thought, I do find the friendship she had with Makoto pretty cute, so she goes here. Leon I have far less to say about. As far as all the male characters go in this first game, he's one of the least annoying. What I can't say I find him interesting. There's something to be said about him being the only one to not care about his talent and want something else in life, but sorry Leon, I just don't care. For good reason, Chihiro is a fan favorite, as he's definitely one of the more likable characters in the cast, and ends up being one of the most useful as well, thanks to him fixing the laptop and installing Alter Ego on it. His desire to be stronger is really admirable. I like that there was a push for development. Just sucks he got killed off right as soon as that happened. As far as any of the Danganronpa 1 characters go who didn't make it to the end, he's definitely at the top of the list of those I would like to see survive to see how he would grow. Easy great tier. Having said that, Mondo is another one I don't know where I want to put him, because he did kill off someone who would become one of my favorite characters, and his hot-headed nature didn't make me want to talk to him too much when I was doing the free time events in my first playthrough. He does have his softer side with the code of conduct he follows, and it's nice to see even he can be good friends with someone like with Kiyotaka. And actually, the fact he was willing to help out Chihiro says a lot about him too. He goes into like tier, where just like Sayaka, I would like them more without the whole murderous intent thing. Up next is his best bro Kiyotaka. He's a lot like Mondo, where he can be a bit off-putting and annoying at first, but once you get to know him, you can appreciate him more. I don't like the fact how drastically he changes once he gets over mourning over Mondo's death, but I'm gonna blame that on Danganronpa being weird more than Kiyotaka himself. Feels like it would be a disservice to put him anywhere but next to his bestie. Ifumi, oddly enough, reminds me of Tora from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, another round kind of perverted character. But while I really do like Tora, I don't really care about Hifumi, and his design is not doing him any favors. This is going to be a spicy take, and probably the one I'm going to get the most shit for, but I really don't like Celeste. She's kind of a bitch, dude. I guess she's the cool goth chick of the series. I get why the fandom likes her, but I'm just not buying in on the hype. She also has the stupidest motive in this first game. She wanted the 2 million to buy herself a castle and go roleplay. Like really, you're the ultimate gambler. You would have made that money eventually anyway. Celeste is an interesting character in that everything about her is putting up a facade, and she do be drippin' though, so she go into neutral tier for me, but just out of spite, dislike. On the other hand, Sakura is goated. Her death is the only one in this first game which makes me teary-eyed, and I just love her friendship with Asahina. I already talked about what all she did, so no need to repeat myself here. I really have no complaints with her. Just like Chihiro, she ended up being a great asset to allow the remaining students to escape, and would have been nice to see make it out alive. Alright, this is a weird one, and I'm going to spend a good amount of time here, as I know Mukuro was the second to die, but I didn't want to make a big tangent, just 2 characters into my tier list. That is because I need to talk about Danganronpa IF. I read IF for the first time for this video. You can see the time difference with the achievements here. And here is where we get the bulk of Mukuro's character, at least before we get to the Danganronpa 3 anime. Just with Danganronpa 1, it's hard to gauge Mukuro for who she really is, as she's supposed to be imitating Junko, and it's not too clear at first of what she's saying is supposed to be her. With that game alone, she'd likely go in the neutral tier, but with IF, she becomes a more fleshed out character. To give a quick synopsis, IF is an alternate scenario where Makoto finds an escape button through the school's gachapon machine, but upon pressing it, it shocks him, which makes him start to regain his memories. He has a chat with Mukuro in the nurse's office, her still disguised as Junko, where he starts to see something is off with her. In the moment when Mukuro was going to be impelled for attacking Monokuma, that's when Makoto yells out at her to move while running towards her, which saves her life, but leaves him heavily injured. The rest of the story follows her as she hides from the rest of the students, argues with her sister, fights off an army of Monokumas, and ultimately finds a way to end the game early. It's a short read, only took me about 3 hours maybe to read all of it, so it won't take up too much time if you're curious. Only thing is that's an unlockable for completing Danganronpa 2. So if you want to read this right as soon as you beat Danganronpa 1, go look up the text online. The best thing about it is we see all of this through Mukuro's eyes and get a good idea of her character we didn't get in Danganronpa 1. I like that there's this conflict in her about living up to the fact she's in ultimate despair. Unlike Junko, she seems willing to give up on despair and go on the side of hope, at least because doing so would cause despair for her sister. It may be in the name of devotion to Junko, but it feels like there's room for redemption here. I think that would have been a really interesting character arc to see, but sadly we only get a taste of that here. The big complaint with Mukuro is her characterization in Danganronpa 3, and her weird masochism regarding Junko's behavior towards her, And well, for the lack of a better word, she's sorta just Junko's bitch to order around. I was surprised to see aspects of the character here as well, especially since this was written several years before the Danganronpa 3 anime came out. So it seems this was always the intended direction for her character, which TBH really blows. At least for now, IF has made me like Mukuro beyond being a good design. She looks pretty cool, and it's such a shame Spike Chunsoft just won't give her new art. Seriously, why keep hiding the fact she's the character? We all know Junko's the bad guy. Please, Mukuro deserves something. I'm putting her in good tier. She'll likely go down because of the anime once that comes, but for now, she goes there. Next is none other than Mukuro's sister, Junko Enoshima, and by extension Monokuma. Monokuma, I'll keep it short. He's a great mascot and is exactly the character he should be for what Danganronpa is. Incredibly evil, but oddly cute and giving me some good laughs with the weird stuff he says at times. Junko I had up a great tier also, as she does a great job of embodying what Danganronpa is. But unlike Monokuma, who has an actual consistent character here, Junko is all over the place. It's like I said earlier, she feels more like this force of nature that is despair incarnate than anything else. For that, I find her entertaining and even scary to a degree, in that she can just act so differently at a drop of a hat. I suppose that has to do with the fact she gets bored easily, so she constantly changes personalities to keep things fresh. I might just place her next to Mukuro and good for now. We'll be seeing a lot more of her in the future anyway. That now leaves the 6 survivors, and I'll go from worst to best. For anyone who's played the game, I'm sure y'all saw this coming. Yasuhiro, unfortunately, is the first to inhabit the despised tier. I was hoping with the second playthrough, I would like him more, but I just cannot stand characters that are written to be unrealistically dumb. It's a trope I always hated, and it's no different here. He's also oddly antagonistic towards you at times, which doesn't help his case at all. This is another thing I'd completely forgotten up until writing this, but just like Mukuro, he does have his own short light novel you can unlock in-game. This time in Ultra Destroy Girls, which I guess I'll have to read when I get to that point. Maybe that will redeem him a bit, but for now, he's definitely my least favorite character from the first game. Speaking of Ultra Destroy Girls, Miss Fukawa is next, and I won't be counting her murderous alter ego as a separate character. Genocide Jill is quite entertaining, I can say that much, but she shares all the same issues normal Toko has. The first of which is her extremely creepy obsession with Byakuya. This is just weird, man, and as much of an asshole Byakuya can be, he doesn't deserve to have to deal with that. The other thing is that Toko just feels very unapproachable, and I didn't have much motivation to want to talk to her. If anything, I just feel kind of bad for her this first game, and I'm glad that Ultra Destroy Girls made her a much more likable character. For now, she goes in dislike. Asahina, I don't have much to say about. I do like her. In this playthrough, when I wanted to talk to someone besides Kyoko, she was my go-to, and she is one of the friendlier characters in the game. Only complaint is she's a bit of an airhead, not to the extent of Yasuhiro, but with him around already, it's just unnecessary to write her like that. I guess she's supposed to be the airheaded but extremely athletic type of girl, but still, it didn't have to be that way. Like I said with Sakura, the friendship here is really nice to see, and as tragic as Sakura's death was, it did give Aoi some development, which is nice. I'm putting her in good tier. She doesn't reach the heights of those above, but I really do like her. I'm excited to talk about Byakuya because it means I get to talk about the second trial, which might just be my favorite in this game. To not waste much time, this absolute mad lad witnesses the crime. Yeah, he saw what Mondo left the changing room after killing Chihiro, and instead of preserving that information and, I don't know, end the trial early, he instead messed with the crime scene to make it look like a serial killer did it. Why? Just to make the game more interesting for him. Before it's revealed that Toko is in fact the infamous killer Genocide Jack during this trial, This character was name dropped during the first chapter, and what I thought was just a one-off joke turned out to be a major part about this game. When Byakuya was spending time in the library, that included reading up on unsolved crimes, which he used that information to imitate Jack's style of killing. Because of him, this second trial is a roller coaster of a ride, and I was so enthralled in what he would do next. Don't get me wrong, he's still a very easy to hate character, as this dude, even till the end, doesn't seem to want to humble himself, but man, he was one of the most entertaining characters for me. Literally the Danganronpa equivalent of Gilgamesh. Great tier. And thus, that leaves our two protagonists pretty much. I think it's quite obvious who I'll be talking about last, and it's not Makoto, I'll say that, but he does come very close, as I absolutely love this dude. In a game filled with all these strange personalities, it feels nice to play as someone more grounded. I love his positive attitude and how he becomes the leading man as the series progresses. Yes, that's acknowledging what is to come, but even then, I'll still place him as my second favorite character in the game. Considering what Danganronpa is, Makoto is a great first protagonist and how much he embodies hope and works to lift up those around him. Okay, I'm sure everyone saw this coming the moment I said the very top tier is color-coded. It's Kyoko. She plays a big part in why Danganronpa 1 is my favorite in the series, as I just cannot get enough of her. The emotionless type I don't usually care for, but something with her just clicked with me here. Those rare times she smiles heals my soul. I love her so much. Easy top tier waifu, has a great design and a refreshing character in the fact she actually knew what the hell was going on at times. I really enjoyed having her as an ally and seeing just how the story would end as her and Makoto come to solve the mystery behind the killing game. I have her sitting on my PC tower on top of this very lucky Anorth plush who gets to spend all his time under her legs. Yeah, she's great, and I love that most fans can agree on that. Oh, and Nagiri is the best Danganronpa ship. Don't even at me. And thus, that is my tier list for now, and I do have them ordered within each tier as well. Several of these characters will be moved as I go through more installments, so this is subject to change. Honestly, I always consider the first game having the weakest cast, so I'm a bit surprised to see most of the cast here in positive tiers. I have to see how I feel about that come V3. Finally, here we are at the end. I knew I was going to cover a lot for this first video especially, but for it to turn out this long, geez, at least this was a game I love this much. I didn't even talk about the music. Danganronpa 1 has a great soundtrack, and you heard some of my favorites throughout the video, and it only gets better with each new game. Since I'm spending these final minutes to gush about this game some more, I need to shout out the character designer, because I'm a big fan of all the main art for the characters. I just like the art style. Plus, he designed two of my favorite servants in FGO. The man just never stops providing. Not exactly praise specific to this game, but I needed to bring that up at some point, so might as well do it now. I really do love Danganronpa 1. It's such a ride from beginning to end and such a great introduction to the series. It does have its problems, most notably the drama minigames. And while I did praise most of the cast here, there was only a small handful of characters here I found likable enough at first to want to start talking to. School mode is also pretty tedious if you want to complete all of it, but that's a side mode which came after the initial release, so that doesn't really count. I think it's neat this game also got an anime, which, as weak as I find it to be, speaks on how popular this game was. Hell, this game even has a VR tech demo version of it. It's free and recreates a portion of the fourth trial. Since I don't have a PSVR, I haven't checked it out myself, but if you got one, give it a try, I bet it's a blast. If you haven't played this game, go do so, you'll still have a great time, I'm sure. While Danganronpa 1 may be my favorite, Next time, I'll be going over what I think is most other people's favorite, Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair. I'm just as excited to revisit that one, so I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on the bright, sunny beaches of Jabberwock Island.